Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Center, sponsored by Small Church Connections. And this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action. And this is actually the podcast. And so we're looking forward today to another guest. This is one of those guests that comes from a little place in Ontario, just outside a big place in Ontario. So it's not hard to find. And I'm just going to let him introduce himself. Maybe some of his ministry journey as he's gone along, and anything else that you want to add there. And I've got a bunch of other questions that I'm all set to go with. So I'll let you take it away, James. Go for it.
All right. Thanks very much. Well, hello to you, Ron, and to the listeners and watchers and the audience. My name is Dr. James Robertson. I am the pastor of Mountsburg and Westover Baptist Churches. We are affiliated with the CBOQ in Ontario here, and obviously that includes Quebec as well. I've been the pastor of this little 2-point charge for just past 10 years. In January, I guess I shouldn't say just. In January, I passed the 10-year mark. So that's very,
quite
very
something,
exciting.
yeah.
Yeah. No, it's great. From these were traditionally the churches that McMaster Divinity College, which was in charge of ordaining a lot of the Baptist ministers in the day. This was kind of, they were considered somewhat training churches. This is where pastors in training would go to cut their teeth.
Yeah.
And many years ago, I decided, I'm like, no, these are about the best congregations one could ever hope to end up with. So I've been happy to stay here. In addition to that, because I'm bivocational, my other profession is I'm a professor of history at Tyndale University, the aforementioned big place close to my small little place, which of course would be Toronto.
Toronto, yeah, you bet.
I can look at it with that sort of tongue-in-cheek manner because I was raised in Western Canada, so I'm well aware of the opinions of the rest of Canada as it pertains to Toronto.
Oh yes. having added to that I also lived in Toronto for a little while as I was growing up and going through high school. So yep. It's all good. Well,
good.
Yeah. Now you came out into ministry 10 years ago, at least at these 2-point charges. Had you had any other experience prior to that? My ministry experience prior to being in these churches was in several United churches in Western Canada and then in Ontario as well. The church I was at right before these ones was in Bronte, which is close to Oakville, Ontario. And anybody who knows that is happy that I didn't include Bronte as part of Oakville. It is a separate neighborhood. I'm sure yes.
Yeah. I worked as youth minister, associate minister, and but this is the first time I was the senior pastor. But that implies that there's some sort of a staff at these churches, and there's not. It is a collection of wonderful, I call them faith families, which in some ways is code for volunteers, not paid.
Yeah.
It's not embraced in that sort of a caustic manner. So yes, I'm the sole paid employee of these wonderful faith families.
Wow, you have all the right terms down. This is great. I'm the lead pastor of how many volunteers, and yes, it's great. So I think there's all sorts of questions that could be asked about 2-point charges. And when I think about it, it immediately brings to mind, well, just a lot of travel, a lot of back and forth. What makes it difficult? The challenges that you see, and maybe some of the advantages that you see in having a 2-point charge.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So to address just the traveling aspect, they're about 15 minutes apart. So it's definitely not overwhelming. And I live in a beautiful part of the country. So the drives between the two services on Sunday mornings is actually one of my secret little, I can go over. I feel bad for Mountsburg as the first church. So maybe I'll just sort of say logistically, we do two services every Sunday. 9:30 a.m. is at Mountsburg. And then 11:20-ish is our running joke in Westover, because it really is when I show up there, and it's a very casual worship environment. So nobody's too much of a stickler on the time. So we say 11:20-ish. When we get there, and like I said, they're about 15 minutes apart. So that drive in between has become one of those wonderful solace moments, reflective moments. I can think back on what I said at Mountsburg and make some improvements for Westover. So maybe Westover gets the better version.
Well, yeah, maybe.
Yeah, but maybe. But what's interesting too is the two of them are very different. They're different in makeup. They're different in temperament. I have two sons, so it's actually a very very close parallel about the temperaments of the two. I love them both for what's unique about them, but they are different, and to treat them the same would be doing a disservice to both.
Oh,
So
for sure. Yeah.
yeah.
And just speaking of that, I've been doing an interim pastorate in a smaller church this last while. Certainly it gains its own character, and you begin to see that. If you could compare the two churches, or at least some idea of what they might look like, and the differences they would have, and thus I would say in pastoring, you're switching back and forth. But what do you see as, boy, that's a long question.
No, it's a great question. It contains nuance, which is great. Yeah, I'm always reticent, just because I wouldn't want characteristics or comparisons. Again, back to my children, I wouldn't want me to be celebrating one, which would make the other feel like I don't feel that that's their gift as well. But they are different. Lacking nuance, the Mountsburg, the first church, the one I actually live right next to, would be a little bit more, for lack of a better term, and I really do detest this term, but for lack of a better term, is a little bit more conservative. That's the church has the choir. It's a very musical church, which is wonderful. They put on variety shows. It's very very involved with a variety of different practical ministries within the larger community. And then Westover, the second church, is very, very casual. Sort of the running joke is we've always sort of struggled with the music component. And they're both older churches, although Westover tends to skew a bit younger. The Westover church we sort of struggled with music, and for about a year there, it was one wonderful woman who was a very active member with her flute, and me leading worship, and I am no singer, so that was a tough.
That would have been fun.
It was not. I think I ruined every single shirt I wore there just from sweating, from just being profoundly uncomfortable. But they're a very gracious community. And so Westover is situated in a community that has a lot of, they're both farmlands, but the Westover community has a lot more of a Dutch background. And so we have a variety of Reformed churches in the area. A lot of people that do attend church are one version of that tradition, or those traditions, I should say. And it's kind of funny because almost by default, through marriages, funerals, community events, whatnot, those who don't fall into any of those camps, I've become somewhat of the de facto or default minister for the community, a role I gleefully embrace because it's very fun. It's church around a pig roast, church, in the field, church in the garage. It's a lot of fun, and that's actually more sort of my mentality, and that sort of, I guess, casual ministry isn't as prevalent on the Mountsburg side.
Right. Yeah. And I see that with varying sizes of churches, but certainly one of the things that I've heard in a number of the podcasts I've done on small churches is very much relationship oriented. And so that, as I see, there's two very different types of churches that you're dealing with. One that certainly is very relational. Let's go out to the garage and have a potluck because we'll run men's ministry in the garage there. And then the other that would be more, not quite, I don't like the term production, but certainly.
Yeah, no. Yeah, see, this is where I always fall short on this thing. Sorry, I realized I just stepped on your toes there. I apologize.
No, not at all.
Mountsburg's very. Did I freeze up there? Sorry. This is the life of the. This is life of the country pastor. If the wind shifts, so does the internet.
Yeah. Exactly.
This is where I fall short, because Mountsburg's actually very, very relational as well. And so one of the fun things we've started doing in Mountsburg about, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years ago. Oh, definitely 4, because it was for a few years before COVID. We would do like music and the prayers and the sanctuary, and then we move midway through the service into the basement, have coffee and snacks. And then I stopped doing sermons years ago because I would introduce like a topic or a question, and it becomes very conversational, and some of the best conversations. And I have members of my faith families that have been, they've been following Jesus for north of 8 decades, and
Yeah.
the wisdom and the perspective and the humor is just an ongoing blessing. Like I genuinely feel, and I know a lot of people say this, but I had a leader in my denomination years ago say one of the best things you can do is pastor people how to pastor you. And it becomes a sort of cyclical family. It becomes a family. Like everybody has their strengths and their weaknesses, and everybody sort of carries each other. And so Mountsburg's got that in droves, and are just some of the best, hardest working people. And probably the biggest corrective for myself, coming from city churches, and I'm city born and city raised, so coming out to the country took an adjustment for a few years, but just so many of my so much of my previous work was building up those relational ministries and doing, like you said, men's ministry and whatnot. And that became redundant because these are farmers, these are community people. They were doing this and they were doing it better. So I just sort of, that was probably one of the wiser things I did is I just sort of stepped out of the way and let them keep doing what they're already doing. And lo and behold, learned more than I ever learned in any class or any book of how to actually connect with people. So there's not a lot of names on things, and they're both very, very, this is what they share DNA. They're both very conversational churches, very relational churches. They're farmers. They just in their DNA is love of neighbor. And that's been really beautiful to witness.
Wow. You're stepping right into a whole area of passion and vision for me, just because I live in a small town, Kindersley, Saskatchewan. This is farmer land. No question about it. And the way people work and the way they organize is so much different than perhaps well, you put a chart in front of them, an administrative chart, and they say, oh yeah, that's very nice, but I'll just go talk to so-and-so because I know it'll get done.
Exactly.
And it's just a very different approach in a small church, and particularly a rural church area.
Yeah. And especially on the other side, what I've really noticed is on the other side of COVID, for a lot of my friends, colleagues, because again, with my work with the university, I get to spend a lot of time speaking with other ministers in a whole variety of backgrounds and a variety of denominations. And one of the things I'm noticing, the vast majority of them is on the other side of COVID, the struggle to bring people back, because of course a lot went online and people really are enjoying Sunday morning church from the comfort of their own home. And so there's lots of conversations that need to happen around there. But my experience was as soon as we could get back and it was safe. And again, I have older congregants, so the health concerns were legit. And people were very, very good at being careful and being safe and staying away if they didn't want to risk anybody. But I never had the issue. Like everybody came back as soon as they could.
Yeah. Well, which brings up, okay, I'm going to depart from my script here and just ask a question of you. As you look back or you look over this last few years, particularly with COVID, there was a lot of questioning about what is church. We're going to go online now. Oh, well, and church isn't meeting in a place. And that, what have you discerned? And as you said, you talk with a number of other pastors, and you're pastoring two small churches right now. Is there anything changed? Is there any atmosphere that's different about how we look at church now?
Yeah, I mean, that kind of is the question. And being like a historian of Canadian Christianity specifically,
By the way, I hear you have a book which we need to publish. We need to push in a few minutes. But let's just go first.
Shameless segue into the book I wrote on this. But you know what? I would make the argument what we're dealing with now is, as with all things, has antecedents. It's a natural outworking of there's going to be multiple things, but if we really want to put it on something that sort of is beyond our control, but is very similar, we can look back to like the 1980s and the advent of televangelism. Like that's the first time you have really interesting church, really high production values. It's salacious, it's fun, it's character driven. And again, it's in the comfort of your own home. And there's a power behind television, which I think many of us forget does still exist on the internet. It is funny how many.
Very much so.
Yeah. So when I'm teaching online, so we at Tyndale on May 7th, we had our convocation for the 2 graduating classes that couldn't have graduations in 2020 and 2021. And it was wonderful. And I was honored to be able to do the blessing at the end of the presentation. So a substantial amount of students and their families showed up to actually just walk across the stage. And it was funny chatting with some of these students afterwards, who, again, we've had a relationship for several years, but have never been in the same physical space. And it was funny how many times the students would comment, they would sort of laugh and be like, it's weird because talking with you now, I feel like I'm meeting a celebrity because I've seen you online for all these years. You've been my professor, but I'm still on the screen. I'm still a detached presence. And that, I think, it's funny. And I understand their point, because clearly I'm not. Yeah. But that's it's the medium is the message. So there is a certain, again, to go back to the televangelism thing, there is that certain celebrity or that detached captive audience, which the internet provides with us as well, does have some very, I would say, almost God-esque qualities in that it's powerful, it's intimate, but it's detached. And so there's language and there's sense behind it, that this next step, which was necessary. I mean, we couldn't gather for a couple of years. And so humans always just get used to the environment that they're in, and then change. We all can't stand change. But also there's just, we can just, break it down to it's just comfortable to get up with your family, sit on your couch, see the people. The thing that I think televangelism highlighted, and I think what we're seeing right now, is for all of our language around community, if a human being can easily substitute church for a televised church, then clearly the community element wasn't that strong. And I don't say that to condemn. I say that we have a lot of people who are introverted, who can have sat in church Sunday in and Sunday out and have found a similar spiritual food consuming, as opposed to interacting with others. And again, that's not to be condemnatory. That's just the reality of what we're in. So I think this goes back to your point about relations. Relationships are everything. And then to wrap this up, this is why I think the strength, the hope that I see, and it's just my opinion, is in the small church. The larger communities have real obstacles to overcome that, to be honest, other than sort of small group ministry, I don't know that that's happening so well. And in this day and age where we have so much information, so many different voices, and it's all in our pockets, what is the draw of community as the Christian church has been communicating it?
Okay, you're touching on some things that just are in my heart and in questioning too. I grew up starting my pastoring and church ministry in the 80s. A little bit in the 70s, but moving into the 80s. And church growth became a large part of that, which unfortunately didn't become about growing as community. Unfortunately, it became growing in numbers. And if you could produce it and make them all, like a televangelist, well, here we have the show on Sunday. And the show that goes throughout the week, which just happens to be a sequel or to what happened on Sunday. Right. If that's all it is, then you lost community. All right, so let's go back to your statement about small churches being perhaps the place to go at this point in what is the church. What would you do? How do we get back to that? Or have we lost it? Where are we at?
Yeah. And this does become the shameless segue, but I genuinely, because I really believe in this point. So the title of the book is Overlooked.
Okay.
Which is a twofold meaning. So one, it's Christians don't tend to be great with their knowledge of history, and doubly so for Canadians. We don't know much about Canadian history, let alone Canadian Christian history. So we've overlooked what I think is some key elements that lead to the questions you're asking. The other part is we've overlooked what I believe is a secret strength, is that Canada has inherited multiple different interpretive paradigms. Obviously, our number one sort of cultural influence would be the United States of America, but we also have to remember that thanks to the British Empire, it's also Europe as well. And so when we look at like the chemistry or the DNA or the makeup of things like the Republic, the United States, and Britain, these are countries that are used to winning.
Yes.
And Canada, that's never been our story. And so one of the things I think Canadians overlook is the fact that we have always, I mean, back to the 1700s, Canada has the ability to thrive in the small in ways that other nations don't. We've been able to find meaning in it. We've actually been able to find pride in it, of being sort of small and unconsidered and overlooked.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I think there's actually a genuine gospel theme in that, is that when we think of things like power, which is the first chapter of the book, power is a very problematic attribute. I mean, again, how do you describe power? But power is a very tricky attribute for any individual Christian, let alone a church, let alone an organization, let alone a cultural institution like Christianity has been in Canada. But I think the church nowadays in the 21st century is overlooked, not considered, basically irrelevant. And that's been a sliding scale since I mean, you know, the seeker sensitive model, that the seeker service that came out in the 80s, and that was a response to declining numbers.
Yeah.
And it had some good stuff, and it kind of worked. Like, it reversed the trend by about 2%. I think in the beginning of the 80s, about 28% attended church once a week, and by, you know, midway it was about 30%. So it kind of worked in like the 80s and 90s, but definitely those numbers have continued a downward slide.
Yeah.
So I really do think that it's that small community thing, which again has been part of the DNA of Canada. Cities are different, country is different. I get that. I'm not trying to overgeneralize, but as part of the DNA of this nation, we thrive in the small because we don't have to adopt those attitudes of power and control and what's our influence over society, which, like, there's no Bible Belt in Canada. There's no ability to provide a voting block to any one political party like American Christianity can do and has done. So if we go down that path, like, how do we get that influence? I'm like, one, I think we've already seen the destructive nature of that path played out both in America and Britain in years gone by. But two, it's not part of our culture. So we're kind of working against ourselves to chase a goal that I don't think is a great goal anyway. So if we just stopped, looked at our country and got away from, like you said, that concentration on numbers, it actually sets us free. Because one of the points I'm making the joke is, like, the great beauty and freedom of 21st century Canadian ministry is you can do whatever you want, because, spoiler alert, no one else is paying attention. No one cares. Do what your community wants to do. All you can do is pleasantly surprise. Like, even if it blows up in your face, and even if it just goes sideways, all the unchurched Canadians, and it's the vast majority of them, will be like, yep, if they even hear about it at all. And I think that's actually what a fun time to be a Christian. It's like, what brings your community joy? For Mountsburg, we do these amazing little shows, and I can't get into it right now, but they are the silliest, most ridiculous things ever. And we sell out 3 shows every year. People come from Toronto to watch these things, and it's just joy. There's no deeper theological reason. Sure, it's supporting the church and the funds help. Yeah. But it's just fun, and the people like doing it. Westover is those garage pig roasts, joking around, you know, tractor pulls, you know, all those conversations late in the night, and it's just joy. And I don't have to sort of make a pastor's report of it afterwards and check the numbers and record the baptisms, as much as it's like, let's have some connections and some real conversations. And I really think that is a powerful and often overlooked gift that Canada has that most other places do not. Oh,
okay. You're fueling my flame here, and I could see it could turn into a fire. But I hear what you're saying, and I agree. We've had Okay, I'm gonna step back and ask another question.
Excellent.
Creative ways that the small church can sort of enter into the community, enter into flourishing as a church themselves. They're gathered together. Any things that you might suggest could sort of push us?
Yeah. So this is more me personally right now.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, I'm very much in, and it's tricky with both jobs. I'm very much trying to be in a season of listening. One, when I think about the future of both of these churches, it's really interesting. I just keep coming up against a wall. It's like I can't see more than 6 feet in front of me. I've a pastor friend of mine who really is about a season of waiting and listening. And so that's really fascinating. So that's been a struggle that I'm kind of I'm in a good headspace today of like, this is going to be what it's going to be. So I'm praying about it and trusting God. The deeper and what inspired this, as I was working through the books, as we got into all the various social upheavals right before COVID, during COVID, I've become profoundly aware, as I've been reading on it, of my own blind spots. The word privilege is thrown around, and sometimes that can be it's used as almost like a shibboleth or like a virtue signaling. So people like, oh, you use the word privilege, we know who you are, you're liberal, you're going that way. Or if you don't use the word privilege, oh, we know who you are, you're going that way. So I'm always a little wary of buzzwords, but I'm just aware of myself, being a white male in Canada. I have blind spots. So I'm trying to, through research and listening, discover where some of those things are, and not out of any desire to have the answer. Mm-hmm. So that makes it very tricky when you're a professor, and of course your students, rightfully so, are asking you for answers, or a minister when your congregants are rightfully so asking for answers. And so I guess I was going to say the short answer to this rambling is wherever you are, it's listening. I remember, and actually this has popped in my head. Thank you, Lord. Years ago, I remember when somebody talked about the ministry is like, wherever you are in your community, act like you just walked into a business meeting late. And so just sit down there and try to figure out what's already been said before you pipe up. Yes. I was like, that's good. Okay. And then just trust God. Trust that God is already doing something. And if you're there, he's inviting you into it, but not because you're the most amazing one. You've just got a small part to play. So be humble and wait. And hopefully you figure out the small part that you're being called to play. I guess that's the closest thing I've got currently.
Well, the unfortunate thing is I've got 1,000 other questions to go here, and we've pretty well run out of time. Sorry about that.
No.
Yeah, I can't believe how quickly this has gone.
I'm so sorry I talked so long.
Yeah, no, that's actually, you spurred on some great thinking. And I think for small churches living in Canada right now, this is the best place to be. Overlooked. Where can they get?
Oh yeah, so okay, so it's Overlooked: The Forgotten Origin Stories of Canadian Christianity. It's through New Leaf Press. It's available on Amazon. So you just have to type that in, and obviously Amazon will send it to you. And then you can also go to Canada Overlooked, all one word, .ca, and you can order through that as well. We're doing a printing run with this lovely little family print house in Brantford. So that we can do, because obviously books in general is not exactly a booming market and something like that on the other side of COVID. But just to wrap up, what I'm hoping Overlooked is, what I hope this has been is, yes, for those of us who are in the small churches, don't embrace the inferiority complex. There's actually a lot of hope. There's a lot of plan. And we know that the Jesus I read about and the God that I follow celebrates that little smallness, because that's when I always get to see the amazing things happen. So I hope there is hope.
There is.
Good.
Well,
good.
I hope others that are listening will hear what you've said, and they'll be listening too. This has been great. Oh, okay. Sorry, I have to say goodbye, but thank you.
Very Canadian, just to end with an apology. Very Canadian.
Exactly. Thank you so much.